And we've got a special guest today from Toronto, Rowan, and we'll give a proper introduction in a moment. And like each account-based Friday, we start our week with a weekly poll, and it's a pretty appropriate poll for our topic at hand as my screen refreshes. Oops, give my screen a second here. So this week we asked a question about account-based marketing and product marketing and the role of product marketing in an account-based strategy. And the question was, what exactly is product marketing really responsible for, or what's their most important contribution? And these were the choices that I came up at the moment. And the reason I came up with these choices is I've had a few clients that have had varying degrees of need. Whoops, I'm gotta mute this out here. Pardon me. So I've had clients that have had varying degrees of questions around product marketing. And so the choices I put: insights, creation of content, which I thought was the primary one, and messaging and positioning. And then we had other. We had a few comments down here. John Steiner was asking, I made it too difficult. Sales needs to be enabled with clarity around the customer need and how product delivers on it. And then Narosha commented all of the above, as did Megan. Lanice, who's joining us here, also mentioned that she loved the question. So anyway, Megan, what was your thought on this question as you think back to product marketing?
Yeah, I feel like, to me, all of these things are really important. I'm like, there are so many other, there's plenty of other stuff that could happen here, but I find that, a lot of times ABM teams feel a little bit like an island, and like they've got to come up with their own messaging, their own content. They need to do all the digging to get customer insights and sort of build that knowledge. And the truth of the matter is there's this treasure trove typically within product marketing, and maybe it's not account specific, but it builds a great foundation, particularly if your product folks also do like any kind of industry marketing or just things that tell you a baseline of what customers like the accounts that you're trying to target care about. And then also the library of content that can be adapted as opposed to having to start from scratch. And that's really, to me, like all of these things are really important, and you don't have to start from nothing. You've got a team to help you, and just, you need to tap into them. That's my take. But with that, I am super excited to welcome our special guest, Rowan Nerona. And it's been my pleasure to work with Rowan, over the past year or so on his amazing product marketing community. And I'll put a link in chat to it. It's 20,000 members strong, all volunteer. He's assembled an incredible advisory group, and he is himself a great product marketing leader and pro now at Showpad, but just with tremendous background and passion for this community. And we couldn't think of anyone better to come talk about the role of product marketing in collaboration with ABM. So Rowan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you. That was very kind of you, Meg, and thanks for having me, John. I adore product marketing. I love it so much that I started the community about 5 years ago, truly as a passion project, quite frankly. And it's a not-for-profit passion project that I run on the side when the 3 kids are in bed and my full-time job for product marketing is done for the day, which these days happens to be at Showpad, who I so excited to join a few weeks ago, and it's actually been 6 weeks. My God, time flies.
Wow.
Really having fun. But so thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure. So we would love to get your take on our poll. So I think you might have a point of view on which of those answers you were expecting versus what you saw. What do you think?
Yeah, not entirely surprised that the messaging positioning was 1. I think content was number 3, and insights was number 2. And it goes with the perception of what product marketing is. And for the record, I'd like to perhaps clear the air as to what the hell product marketing is, so that when you do the poll again, perhaps the order will be a little bit different. For me, product marketing as a function, the product marketer in an organization, whether it's a startup or a large enterprise, think of them as the conductor. And you have your go-to-market teams as the orchestra. You got your horns, you got your wind instruments, you got, all these different parts. And if they are not in tune and synchronized, then what the audience is hearing is just a bunch of noise. Each could be playing their best, but it's just a bunch of noise. And so the role of the product marketer is to be the conductor for this orchestra. Product management, at the top end of it, and then going downstream all the way through to marketing, all the way through to sales, customer success, rev ops, enablement. Product marketing is the one that is just conducting all these folks into a synchronized, unified voice to the market. How we do that is we have to do three things top of mind, always. Every bucket of effort that a product marketer does at a startup or an enterprise can always be neatly put into three buckets. And those three buckets are voice, value, and velocity. And so going back to the poll, I was a little bit surprised because the first thing a product marketer should do, no matter what, is understand the voice of the market, the voice of the customer, the voice of the competitors. And with that, they should be the go-to individual in the organization when it comes to where should we focus our efforts, which market should we play in, which market should we not play in, which customer segments should we go after, which industries are worth exploring. That's the voice component. And so the poll for me was a little bit, the next time what I'd like to see perhaps is insights, voice being that number one thing, because everyone comes to us for content. I get it. You need a sales deck, it comes to product marketing, content. We can create that content for you, but without any of the background and the context and data and the insight, that content is not going to resonate. So it always starts with the voice of the customer, the competitor, and the market as a whole. So that's my initial take on the poll. And then the final two, voice, value, velocity. I can talk about that a little later on, but it starts with those three buckets.
I've got a quick question. I love that framework, by the way, with the 3 V's. It's very memorable. Just double clicking into the voice portion of things. And typically we see a lot of questions coming up around ICP, your ideal customer profile. We use so many acronyms. I feel like it's Star Trek speak, but your ICP and product marketing's role as part of that. How do you go about, or what are you seeing in terms of ways that the voice is achieved? Like, how do you go about achieving the voice, I guess, other than, there's gong.io, or you could listen to Gong, but that's kind of hearing from your sales team. If you're going into a new market or plowing new territory, how do you get a voice?
Yeah, great question, John. And so who gets the voice? So it's always product management and product marketing coupled together. Should have a joint task force in who understands the voice and how we get this information. And then where do we get the information from? It's a collection of things. So for existing, organizations that are fortunate to have a Gong, you can get it from your prospect calls, from your existing customer calls. But voice of the market is something that product marketing leads the effort on, but they're not the sole input. Meaning we have to go to sales and understand what they're hearing from their prospects. We have to go to customer success. We have to understand what they're hearing from existing customers. We have to go to our analyst groups like the Gartners and the Forresters of the world. What are these folks saying on inquiry calls? And so there's various aspects. Most importantly, quite frankly, these days, where everyone aggregates is communities of their own people. And so the concept of community is so important because likes like. If I'm a CIO, more than just taking the word of Gartner or a vendor, I'm going to go to my peers, have a conversation with them. And so we have to be part of these community groups, not to sell into them, but just to listen. So community associations, these are crucial areas where we can listen and get some of this input, but it's a collection of inputs.
So wondering too, kind of how right now do you see product marketing collaborating effectively with other parts of the marketing team? What do you think it takes? Like, is that sort of product marketing needing to do that outreach? Do you think that it would be helpful to have those other teams, whether it's ABM or demand or anybody within the organization? Like, what do you see as the best way to sort of make that collaboration effective and part two of that. And at what point in the planning process do you see them working together typically, if you do?
Yeah, great question. So I'll use the word enablement for your first question. And then from a planning perspective, I'll tackle planning second. So from an enablement perspective, I think product marketing, the second most important function, imperative of a product marketing leader is interlock. The first is build, meaning are you building the right team and then nurturing the right team? The second is interlock. And then I get into voice, value, velocity. So at all times, there's 5 things I'm always concentrating on throughout the year. And if it's anything more than 5, I just can't. I don't have the bandwidth. So we'll stick to the 5. It's nice and easy to remember. So going back to the second one, interlock. We can, being right, as they say, is not always just good enough. So we can have the best plans, we can have the best output, but if we don't have the right interlock with product management, if we don't have the right interlock with marketing, sales, customer success, RevOps, where a lot of the data and insights reside, and the enablement team, which sometimes falls under product marketing, then our jobs aren't complete. So what I do is I work with our teams to always think about how are we going to empathize with the functions that we're going to work with on a weekly basis, and then how are we going to form that interlock and feedback loop mechanism on a weekly basis. So putting that process in place is crucial. It can't be ad hoc. And so that goes back to the second point of planning, so that when we actually do decide that we want to do certain things in this quarter or this year, we have the demand gen folks, we have the sales leaders, we have the customer success leaders at the table with us to talk about, all right, what are the goals for this quarter? What are the goals for the year? And we're going to create sales plays, customer success plays, demand gen campaigns collectively based on the voice that we keep hearing about, that we're enabling you on, and based on the value that is predicated on the voice component. How do we position ourselves? How do we message? So those feedback and interlock loops are crucial. The first thing you need to do is sit down and understand, how often do I talk to my demand gen leader from a planning perspective, but also from a tracking perspective? What does that loop look like? And so interlock for me is crucial.
When you're talking about interlock and thinking about all those different functions there, one function that comes to mind is sales enablement. And thinking about, like, in an account-based motion, kind of a consistent issue that we see in a lot of our engagements is product marketing and sales enablement are not only critical, but they either are not understood or underinvested, just not the right level of investment, particularly sales enablement side. Does product marketing play or feed into that sales enablement? And if so, what are you seeing there? What are you experiencing as part of that interlock?
Yeah, and I think great question. So sales enablement should be sunsetted. The term and even the ideology of sales enablement should be sunsetted. And it should be replaced with revenue enablement, not because it sounds fancier and because everyone wants to associate revenue to a tagline, because it's true. If we, product marketing, voice, value, we have the voice and the value. If we are not packaging that and nuancing it for all the teams responsible for revenue, and that's not just sales, it's marketing, it's sales, it's customer success, especially those 3. If we are not enabling all 3, then our voice to the market is going to be inconsistent. Our message to the market is going to be inconsistent, and it's going to be very disparate. Even though sales is, going out and inquiring, and customer success is all about retention and expansion, the message has to be the same, because going back to our earlier discussion, these people that we're selling to and the people that already have our product, they're all part of the same community. They're in the same community. And when they talk to each other and they're hearing the same thing, existing customers versus prospects, we're now coming to them in a unified manner and in a clear manner. So revenue enablement should be, and I'm biased here, but I'm going to say it, something that product marketing either owns or has a very strong interlock and connection dotted line to. I'll go one step further. There shouldn't be campaigns that are put out into the marketplace, whether it's an ABM, any type of marketing campaign, without the enablement of product marketing to ensure that A, do we have the right target audience? B, do we have the right message for that audience? If it's an industry, for example, are we nuancing the messaging and providing a certain amount of veneer value, proposition veneer for that specific industry? That comes from product marketing because of our deep insight into the market. So that form of enablement for campaigns, sales conversations, customer success conversations is crucial.
How do you see product marketing being measured today in terms of their contribution to the business? Because I think that's also an interlock point, right? If you can have shared goals with your ABM or your demand team, sort of that can make life a little better for both of you. But curious to know kind of what you see as the trend right now in terms of the ways that product marketing is measured.
Yeah, so I speak to a lot of product marketing leaders, and when you ask them, they say, "Oh, revenue growth and customer retention." I'm like, okay, that's fantastic long term, and those are good strategic metrics. But you need the tactical operational metrics to really drive the needle on a week to week, month to month basis, so we can pivot and spin as needed. And so for me, if we understand the voice of the people we are serving, and then we craft the right message and stories for those people, then the win, I missed the last part. And we also do so with an eye towards the competitor. Mm-hmm. So we know how to differentiate against them. Then naturally, if we do that right, our win rate, close ratio, should be exponentially better. Our sales cycle should be better, because what it initially took 8 months, we're now doing in 4 to 5 months, because we've mapped out the journey for this buyer. We know them so intimately well. We know them from the consideration stage all the way through to the close stage. We know what to say when and what to offer when, because we're tracking this content and the usage of the content, so that the sales cycle is now shortening. For me, those are the two metrics that we as product marketers can control: win rate and shortening the sales cycle. And then there's our demand gen brethren will come to us and say, "Hey, lead gen pipeline, it's in trouble. How can you help us?" And it goes back to the same thing. Who are we targeting these campaigns to? With what message and with what offer? And if your pipeline is not doing well, then we're not doing a good enough job on the voice and the value buckets to serve you, Mr. and Mrs. Demand Gen Manager.
Do you work with demand gen teams typically to do any kind of testing of messaging or content or things like that? Sort of how does that, because I know that demand teams often do that kind of work, but curious to know, what you've seen in terms of product marketers getting connected to that sort of testing to ensure that, hey, we think this is a great message based on our insights, but let's be sure.
Yeah, no, it's a great point, Meg. And we should do more of it. And most often we're so stretched thin because product marketing is a underfunded function. Hopefully with this call and more of these types of calls, the powers that be invest more in marketing, but we should be testing. We should be testing by audience. We should be testing by industry, meaning are the messages for that audience or that industry working, not working? Why? So the point is we should be testing more than we perhaps do today or have the cycles to do today.
Yeah. Well, and I wonder, if part of that too is that does become the partnership, right? Like demand teams tend to be a bit better funded, and they actually have and then the ops team will have the resources to do the testing. I would think that might be one where you could partner with them, right? It's like, instead of just always being the one to give. And John, I was so funny. I was looking for that too. This great article, maybe just give a shout out to this great article and a little preview to our guest as well.
Yeah, next week, in fact, we're going to have Erica Seidel, who's a retained recruiter, speak on kind of the trends that she's seeing in searches. But she brought this article to the forefront of the challenge of hiring for product marketing and kind of the variations of the skills. And in fact, I was going to ask you that too, Rowan, in terms of, it's almost like I remember back to my CMO days that there are almost different flavors of CMOs when I went through the interviewing process. And I kind of fashioned myself as somebody who is data-driven. I've got a finance undergrad and somebody who's got a passion for demand gen at the time, now ABM. I imagine product marketers have a similar challenge of it probably means a lot of different things to different people because of the variation of skill sets. And Erica kind of points out all those different skill sets. In fact, I think she said hire product marketing leaders without pulling out your hair, which is kind of ironic here. But just your perspective of how do you level set that, or how do you normalize, or what is a good set of skills for product marketers to have there?
Yeah, it's a great question. And before I answer that, I'm going to go back to something that Meg said earlier with regards to the metrics. The other part that if we're to be taken seriously that we need to measure on is usage. And so it's one thing to fill the pipeline. It's one thing to close people and help the organization do that. But product marketing needs to work with customer success as yet another key stakeholder to ensure that the usage of the product is where it needs to be. And now PLG is more than just a buzzword, product-led growth. So product marketing has a role to play in nuancing the message, even for retention and expansion, so that product usage metric is where it needs to be. Because if it's not, then churn is definitely on the horizon. And going back to your question, John, product marketing, it's this perfect balance of left brain, right brain. And it is very, very hard to find someone who has that balance. They either skew left or they skew right. Because for voice, you need someone who is meticulous from a research standpoint, data-driven. But then when you translate that voice bucket of insight into the value, there needs to be some creativity there. There needs to be some out-of-the-box thinking. There needs to be some provocation for how we're going to go to the market. So for me, I just went through this exercise at Showpad. I was hiring 2 product marketing directors, and so if folks are interested in some product marketing roles, shout out, Showpad is hiring. But the 2 individuals I brought on board very recently they complement each other. One is a lot more left brain oriented, the other is more right brain oriented. And so one will scour the market and ensure that we are very, very informed. The other is a little bit more on the creative side. But the one trait that both have to have, any product marketer needs to have, is empathy towards their internal stakeholders, because of all the stakeholders I mentioned are required of our success, from product management all the way through to sales, customer success, empathy. And the second one is we have to do an absolutely superb job of listening before just blurting out the next greatest tagline or messaging. We have to listen. So those are the 2, I would say, most important skill sets to hire for.
And what do you see as the biggest change for product marketing over the course of the last, year or so? What do you think looks different versus, sort of 2019?
Product marketers typically weren't associated, going back to your metric question, Meg, with truly driving the pipeline or truly owning the number. And what is apparent now is you can either be considered a cost center as a function or an architect of growth. And so if you want to be an architect of growth, you have to associate yourself with the metrics that move the dial of the business. So product usage being a key example. We have to take the voice component, the value component, and now we'll talk about the last V, which is velocity. We have to package that goodness into sales plays, customer success plays, so sales plays for acquisition, customer success plays for retention and expansion, so that we are directly driving success for those 2 stakeholders. And from a marketing standpoint, so it's good old MQLs, SQLs, we absolutely should have some of those metrics associated to us and be accountable for those metrics. Because if we're just going to brief the poor demand gen folks with some hunky-dory messaging and content, and then say, all right, now it's your problem, it'll never work. And we'll never be taken seriously as a credible function, as an architect of growth. So we have to be as accountable to the MQL, SQL metrics that our demand gen folks are. We have to be as accountable for the close metrics that our sales reps are accountable for. We have to be as accountable for usage that our customer success stakeholders are accountable for. So for me, that's the biggest change, because budgets shrunk, things in a pinch, who are you going to cut? And if we can't attribute ourselves to the metrics that matter, then we're a cost center. And if you're a cost center, you're out.
Yeah, and on that happy note, um, but the funny part is, I think product marketers must be doing a pretty good job of it because, per Erica's message and yours too, right? There are a lot of people looking for these skills in the market. It's a super hot role. I think because people are recognizing it has become so critical. Would love to know if anyone has questions for Rowan. Based on kind of his knowledge. I think we've got a people from sort of different points of view. So I would love to hear if there are any questions out there.
Yeah.
I see a hand raised. Lenice, go ahead.
Hey, Rowan. Yeah, no, I loved your last piece on velocity. And that's something that is, I'm literally going through this right now of where do I go to get these sales plays and trying to grab for straws here. And, I think in some cases, what I find, at least on my side, is, we have these things that are being built out towards sales plays. But I mean, what would you recommend in terms of, you pull in the voice, the value? How do you then go about activating these sales plays? Because I'm assuming it, hearing from you now, I'm like, okay, light bulb is clicking. These should be coming from product marketing. In terms of leading, because as you say, you're kind of the conductor and you need everybody to come in. My question is, how do you start to activate those sales plays, and how often do you start to refresh them based off of all the insight that you're getting?
Yeah. And thank God Meg said your name, because I was going to butcher how I pronounced your name.
You wouldn't be the first.
Lynn, I know. And then the nice part of your name is the one that threw me off. So you're a very nice Lynn is how I would think of it. But it's a great question. For me, yes, product marketing is accountable for creating the sales play or the customer success play, two different motions. One, you could have a play that is about competitive displacement, or you can have a play about market penetration or upsell or cross-sell. There's different types of plays out there. But first and foremost, if you're doing this for the first time in your organization, form a little, I hate to use the word steering committee because God knows we have too many steering committees at organizations. Form a little tiger team or task force, call it something else. And this task force should have product marketing leading the meeting. It should have your sales leaders at the meeting, and then your customer success leaders at the meeting. Amongst yourselves, 1 quarter in advance, because a sales play for me is a shorter shelf life is better, 3 months to 6 months max in duration. And that allows you to focus in for that quarter. But a quarter in advance is when you start to plan with these leaders. You bring to the table the voice, the value components. They bring to the table their hard-earned metrics of what do we need to do to win in this quarter for my team from a sales perspective or a customer success perspective. Then you start to work with them to say, the low-hanging fruit here based on your metrics, your quota, is we need to go after competitor A. And I think that's going to help us immensely because we heard that they're struggling on XYZ product release, which they did a horrible job on. And then you're collectively going to build out that sales play from those different inputs. Why you need them at the table well in advance is because when you decide to then go roll out these sales plays or customer success plays, I witnessed this many times in frustration, is you have the messaging, nailed down. You have the content beautifully laid out. You have sales scripts and voicemails and everything else, in a box, beautifully packaged. And then you go to the sales team and you're enabling them and they don't pay attention to you. But if their sales manager is the one that provided input into creating the play, so they had a voice at the table from day one, they're going to be the ones that are driving their teams to adopt the play. So from an enablement standpoint and a planning standpoint, that's why you bring these people to the table from day one, not go to them with a silver bullet and say, hey, what do you think? And hit me up offline. I have some frameworks as to how to structure the plays and how to think about creating the plays and the steps. Happy to share.
No, that's great. And what I love that you had about that is not just bringing them together, but each of them has a role, and this is what they need to bring to the table. So yeah, I will definitely be reaching out to you. Thank you so much.
Most welcome.
All right.
Excellent.
Well, this is great stuff, and I know we're kind of at time. John, any last words before we go?
I'm so inspired with what Rowan has shared here. If we want to join your community and we're not a product marketer, is that taboo? Or do you let a few people in that are, wannabes as part of that process? Because it sounds pretty exciting. And I guess if you could put in the comments, or I think Megan put it in at the beginning, if people want to join, what's the best way to join that community?
Yeah, we have a monthly newsletter, so subscribe to the newsletter. We don't have a Slack group because, quite frankly, this started as a not-for-profit, and it is still a not-for-profit. I've never had a sponsorship prospectus or anything like that. We did 6 conferences a year throughout North America. My kids would man the registration tables because we wanted to keep costs low. LinkedIn would host us every year in San Francisco. Amazon would host us in Seattle, and so on and so forth. SAP in New York, but so there's only so much hours in the day for me to put towards this because I have a full-time job and the 3 aforementioned kids. So there's a monthly newsletter. There's a podcast that we just rolled out, and we just did a podcast yesterday with Robert, the CMO of Atlassian. He was kind enough to join us and lend his voice to that. And then we're about to start some executive roundtables and webinars. So that's the way that you guys can stay involved. I would just go to the website and subscribe. And if you're ever stuck and need a template or need some help, hit me up. That's what the community is here for. Happy to help.
Yeah,
Awesome.
Rowan, thank you. It's truly a public service. And I'm actually going to put a link to the recent post. It's really cool. And it talks about something I'm excited about, which is that link between product-led growth and sort of the inevitable move to sell to enterprise, AKA account-based marketing. So that's the next phase. If you're great at PLG, you're going to have to get great at ABM next. But it's a great discussion. Congratulations on that.
Thank you. Thank you. And thanks for having me. Much appreciated.
Our pleasure. And thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. And we wish you all a really lovely rest of your day and weekend.
Yeah. And next week, we've got Erica Seidel, who's a retained recruiter on the marketing side. So, like and subscribe to this on YouTube for those that are joining in via recording. And if you can join us live next week,